Martha Stewart just exposed the one thing Meghan Markle desperately did not want the public looking at, and the furious response may have turned one brutal comment into a full-blown scandal. Martha Stewart is 85 years old, has built an empire, survived prison, rebuilt her career, and somehow still has absolutely zero interest in sugarcoating anything. And now, after one seemingly casual observation about Meghan, the entire conversation has shifted. What was supposed to be another celebrity lifestyle discussion suddenly became a question of authenticity, credibility, royal trust, and whether Meghan can handle criticism from someone who has already conquered the exact world she is trying to enter. And that is where this gets uncomfortable.
Is Meghan Markle about to go to war with Martha Stewart? Based on the intel we heard from a dinner party that they both attended, it seems Meghan Markle may have already been caught.
Because when the original speaks about the copy, people listen differently. Martha Stewart was being discussed as someone who had gone through an extraordinary fall, come out the other side, and built an enormous second career. That history matters because Martha Stewart did not simply wake up one morning and announce that she was going to become a lifestyle authority. She spent decades establishing herself. She built the businesses, created the reputation, and earned the credibility that made her name almost synonymous with the lifestyle industry itself. So when Martha Stewart looked toward Meghan and questioned this sudden transformation from actress to princess to homemaking personality, the words landed much harder than an ordinary celebrity criticism ever could.
As you said, she's she went to prison and she came out and built this whole second career. Seemed to do very well in it. Obviously built a gigantic business too. Yeah, she is not somebody to play around with, and that passive-aggressive criticism of Meghan Markle there was so enjoyable and so deserved.
There it was. No screaming, no dramatic attack, no elaborate takedown. Just one devastating observation. If you're an actress, it is difficult to transition into a princess and then somehow transition again into a homemaking guru on television. And that phrase cut straight through the glossy image. Because what Martha Stewart was really questioning was not whether Meghan could appear on television. She was questioning whether the identity being presented to the public had actually been earned. And suddenly the issue was no longer simply a television show. It became authenticity. Meghan was reportedly furious, and this is where the story begins to get much more explosive. Because if the comment had simply been ignored, it might have disappeared within days. But instead, the controversy kept growing. Martha Stewart then revealed something even more sensitive. After Meghan returned from the United Kingdom, the two were apparently at the same California dinner party, and Martha Stewart said she barely spoke with Meghan while still knowing exactly what Meghan had been talking about. According to the account, Meghan was discussing the United Kingdom trip, including what happened during the visit involving King Charles and what had transpired at High Grove. That is not ordinary Hollywood gossip. That is the kind of information that immediately raises a much bigger question. Who is talking? Who is listening? And who can actually be trusted?
If you're an actress, it's hard to then transition to a princess and then from a princess into a homemaking guru on a television show. It doesn't sort of follow. So go from there.
Meghan was reportedly furious once Martha Stewart's account became public, because the timing could hardly have been worse. Harry and Meghan had been carefully trying to rebuild their relationship with the royal family, and suddenly came the suggestion that Meghan had been discussing a private royal meeting at a Hollywood dinner party. Whether every detail was accurate or not, the optics were brutal. If someone is trying to convince a family that private conversations can remain private, why would a story like this emerge at all? And then came the response. Instead of allowing the story to fade, Meghan's camp pushed back. The dinner host was contacted. Statements were issued. Martha Stewart was essentially portrayed as confused or mistaken. The explanation was simple. The family had a great time and nothing private about the meeting had been discussed. But Martha Stewart did not retreat. Now the controversy had transformed completely. What could have been one passing remark had become a public disagreement over what Meghan actually said. And Meghan did not stop with the denial. The party host was brought into the story as a witness and contacted People magazine to dispute Martha Stewart's version, insisting that Meghan had only said the family had a great time and had not discussed the European vacation in detail. But here is the part that made the backlash even more intense. The response itself became part of the story, because suddenly people were not only asking whether Martha Stewart's account was accurate, they were asking why Meghan needed such an aggressive rebuttal in the first place. Why challenge Martha Stewart publicly? Why bring another person into the dispute? Why take a comment that might have disappeared and give it another round of headlines. And that is where the real damage may have happened. The harder Meghan pushed back, the more attention returned to the original criticism. The conversation was no longer moving toward the lifestyle brand, the television image, or the carefully constructed public narrative. It was now circling one uncomfortable question. Why did this particular comment hit such a nerve? Martha Stewart had not needed the controversy. She did not appear desperate for attention from it. She already had a decades-long reputation. But Meghan's reaction gave the comment oxygen, and once the oxygen arrived, the fire spread. The most dangerous thing about a public feud is not always what the other person says. Sometimes it is what your reaction makes everyone start wondering, and the questions surrounding Meghan were only beginning. But the deeper problem was never really the dinner party. Meghan's real anger was reportedly coming from something much bigger. Martha Stewart's criticism of Meghan's transformation into a lifestyle expert. That criticism put the entire brand under a microscope, and suddenly every polished image, every lifestyle claim, every carefully presented product looked different under the glare. This was no longer just about one conversation in California. It was about whether the person presenting herself as a lifestyle authority could actually convince the public that she belonged in that world. And that is precisely why the response became so important. Meghan should never have involved the host, especially after the host's response effectively painted Martha Stewart as confused. That move did not make the controversy disappear. It made the controversy louder, because Martha Stewart was not some random celebrity whose criticism could simply be brushed aside. She was 85, experienced, established, and still sharp enough to recognize exactly what was happening. And according to the commentary surrounding the controversy, challenging Martha Stewart publicly was an enormous gamble. Meghan already faced a difficult public image, while Martha Stewart possessed something incredibly valuable: goodwill accumulated over decades. So every aggressive response risked producing the exact opposite effect. Instead of making Meghan appear confident and powerful, it made Meghan appear defensive. And once that defensive image took hold, Martha Stewart's original criticism suddenly became an even bigger story. The very response designed to protect Meghan's reputation was now helping keep the criticism alive. A PR team, according to the commentary, should never have encouraged this kind of escalation, because it created even more drama around Meghan. The problem, however, was whether Meghan was actually willing to listen to advice. And then came what the commentary described as Meghan's biggest mistake. Silence would have been the smartest weapon. Let the story fade. Let the internet move on. Give it a week, and perhaps almost nobody would remember a dinner party comment. But Meghan pushed back publicly. Her camp released statements, and suddenly something that could have disappeared became a headline that refused to die. Worse still, the attention that Meghan presumably wanted focused on her lifestyle brand, and her attempt at royal reconciliation was redirected toward a feud with Martha Stewart. The fire did not merely receive fuel. Meghan's response, according to the commentary, built the fire itself. And perhaps that explains why the criticism about Meghan's television show appeared to sting so badly. The royalist argument was that Meghan may have been more upset by Martha Stewart's perceptive observation about the entire transformation, actress, princess, then homemaking guru. That was the shade hiding underneath the polite language. And suddenly, the comparison became impossible to ignore. Martha Stewart had endured enormous setbacks, including prison, and rebuilt her career. The advice implied by that history was brutally simple: absorb the criticism, keep going, and let the work speak. Or, as late Queen Elizabeth would have said, never complain, never explain. Yet the accusation hanging over Meghan was that she repeatedly did the opposite: complain and explain, then complain and explain again. That leads directly to the question nobody on Meghan's side seemed eager to answer. If Martha Stewart's account was completely false, why was the response so aggressive? Martha Stewart was 85, one of the most respected names in American lifestyle, and had seemingly little reason to invent a dinner party story. She did not need the attention. She was not dependent on Meghan for publicity. She simply mentioned what she said she heard. Yet the reaction transformed that passing comment into a much larger national conversation. And according to the argument being made, that is where the real mystery lies. A person who believes a story is completely harmless or completely false does not necessarily need to unleash a massive damage control response. When the response becomes larger than the original accusation, people naturally begin examining the response itself. Then came the bluntest challenge of all: stop talking about things you should not talk about, because according to the commentary, Meghan clearly was talking about them. Martha Stewart had no obvious reason to fabricate the story, and the context mattered. Martha Stewart had reportedly never been bitter or jealous toward people following in her footsteps. She She had even wished others success and had previously given Meghan advice that Meghan apparently ignored. The message was becoming increasingly clear. Martha Stewart did not necessarily have something against Meghan. Martha Stewart simply had standards. And if Meghan had listened instead of fighting, perhaps the entire situation could have looked different. Instead of arguing with a woman who had spent decades building exactly the kind of world Meghan was attempting to enter, Meghan could have taken the criticism as instruction. But then came the moment that made the comparison even more revealing when Martha Stewart was asked how she felt about other celebrities following in her footsteps. Martha Stewart's answer was remarkably simple: good luck. She praised Gwyneth for building an interesting collection of businesses, acknowledged her success, and pointed to her Oscar and influence. Then came the contrast with Meghan. Martha Stewart said she did not really know Meghan very well and hoped Meghan knew what she was talking about. And then she delivered the sentence that turned the entire exchange into something much sharper: authenticity was everything, and being authentic and knowledgeable about your subject matter was extremely important. That was the real roast. Martha Stewart did not need to directly accuse Meghan of lacking authenticity. She did not need to say the words. The contrast had already been created. Gwyneth received praise for her accomplishments, while Meghan received a cautious hope that she actually knew what she was talking about. It sounded polite, but the implication was devastating. Authenticity, knowledge, experience, those were the standards Martha Stewart placed at the center of the lifestyle world, and suddenly Meghan's entire brand was being judged against them. Martha Stewart spent decades earning her position. Meghan was now attempting to establish hers through jam and candles, and that contrast was impossible to miss. When the person who built the world you are trying to enter questions whether you understand your subject, the strategic response is not necessarily to fight. Sometimes the smartest response is to listen, because maybe the most damaging part of this entire controversy was never what Martha Stewart said. Maybe it was how loudly Meghan's reaction made everyone look back at it. And now the question remains hanging in the air: was Martha Stewart telling the truth, or was Meghan simply overreacting to an honest observation? That question is not going away quietly.